Hi everyone, and if you're new here, I'm Jade, and today is going to be my January wrap up, everything I read in January, like a little review of the books, so you can see what I've been reading, and maybe you'll find something you want to pick up. This is officially the first wrap up video on my channel, and I'm really excited to do this because I love watching people's wrap ups because I just love to get an overview of what they've been reading and how they rank the books against each other and things like that. So, I'm super excited to be doing my first one. But I'm gonna try not to ramble too much, so let's get into it. So my first read of 2025 was Throne of Glass by Sarah J Maas. I'm sure many of you have probably read this. I read ACOTAR last year, loved the series, so got the Throne of Glass set for Christmas. So I had to kick off 2025 with this. I did rate it 5 stars, by the way. I just feel like it was really, really easy to read, and I didn't want to put it down. I actually finished it in a couple of days. I just really loved it. I always think Sarah J Maas's writing is just super accessible, and I think this was slightly easier than ACOTAR to an extent to just get into. But at the same time, I think the storyline is a little bit more simple than ACOTAR, if I'm honest, so far. But obviously, one book in the series. Just a quick overview of what it's about, not to spoil it for anyone. But long story short, a girl is in jail. She gets taken out of jail by a prince to take part in like a competition to work for the king. The king is evil and horrible, as they often are in these kinds of stories and in fantasies. Not always, that wouldn't be fair, but most of the time. Basically, there's like this whole competition that she has to win. So I guess you could say kind of a little Hunger Games vibe-ish in that there's like a competition, but this isn't fight to the death. You don't have to die to be eliminated. So it's different in that sense because I think most books where there are competitions, you kind of have to die to win. Die to win. That doesn't make sense. You have to kill off all the competition in order to win, so a lot of people die. But it's not quite the case here. And there's a little bit of romance going through this. But yeah, fantasy romance, drama. Yeah, I loved it. So the second book I picked up was The Family Remains by Lisa Jewell. This is a second part. It's to a duology by Lisa Jewell. I read the first part because my book club chose it last year. And so we read that in September last year. And I loved the first book. I rated that 5 stars. I thought it was really well written. I don't really want to obviously tell you the plot of this because it is a second part, but to explain the duology a little bit, the first book is about some children that live in a house and their parents start like losing money. They let some people move in and they kind of start this almost like crazy cult, and a lot of crazy stuff happens, and we kind of see it like from the past but also from the present where some of the characters are now. Yeah, I don't want to say too much, not to give away the story, but it's a really good sort of like psychological thriller, I would say. And yeah, this is the second part. I still really enjoyed this. I don't think it's as good as the first part, but that's because this more explains a lot of the unanswered questions from the first book. There wasn't like it wasn't left on a cliffhanger, and you could definitely read the first book and not read this one. But I think there's a few questions that people had about maybe where certain characters got to or things like that, which are kind of like answered in this sort of sequel. So I still really enjoyed this and I loved getting to know that, but it isn't the same kind of like thriller suspense that's created in the first book because this is more like of a wrap up. It does have its own bits of storyline and some suspenseful stuff, but I just don't think it's the same. But I still rate it 4 stars because I still found it really easy and enjoyable to read, and like I wasn't bored at all. I still really enjoyed it. It's just the first book is better to me, but I think that's just because you're suddenly like hit with the story, whereas this is just a follow up. But that duology was my first introduction to Lisa Jewell. I really do like her writing, and I definitely need to read more of her books. And also, I will say, I am just pleased to sort of get like a series done. I mean, it's only a duology, but I do feel like I've kind of dived into quite a few things at a series. Either I haven't started them yet and they're on my TBR, or I'm in the middle of series and I just feel like there's so many and I'm like, I kind of needed to wrap up some series. So that's why I'm glad I got this one read. So much of January had a lot of snow, and I spent a lot of time reading because I was kind of stuck inside. We did have some days there was warnings not to go out and things like that. So, yeah, the next book I therefore went for, which if you watched my TBR video, you probably would have seen me say I think I was going to read this next because of the snow, was Any Trope by You by Victoria Levine. So this is an ARC copy. It actually comes out in April, but for me, because it's set in Alaska, it just had those perfect vibes when I was like in here in the snow. So I thought it was a perfect time to pick up and review an arc that I had been given. And honestly, I really enjoyed it. So ultimately, it is a romance, but what I really like is it's got quite a good sort of like humor in it, where the main character is, in fact, an author, a romance author, and basically is known for all the stereotypical romance tropes. And she ends up getting outed as actually not being much of a romantic herself, not really believing in romance, after her own personal experiences, etc. And her diary basically gets leaked to her fans turn against her, and her sister pays for her to have this getaway to Alaska, where she has her own kind of love story that kind of fits into those stereotypical tropes. And so it's kind of like an ironic thing because this book kind of highlights and a little bit makes fun of romantic tropes while embracing them all at the same time. And I think it was brilliantly written. It does have a little spice in it, so if you're not into your spice, this probably isn't for you. But if you don't mind a bit of spice in your books, like I never go to find spice. Like I never pick something up because I'm like, oh, it's got spice in it. But if it's in there, I never usually mind. But yeah, I thought this was a really good story. There's a lot about family relationships and navigating different situations and difficult family situations. And so I thought this was great, and I really do actually recommend it. And I gave this 4 stars. So the next book I read was Before the Coffee Gets Cold, and my friend Esme recommended this to me, and it just sounded really, really good from how she described the plot. Like it just sounded something like I would be really interested in. So ultimately, the plot is about time travel, and there are like these prerequisites for getting it to work. So it's all set in this cafe, and you have to sit in a particular chair, and you have to wait for this like ghost to move so you can use the chair. And there's a lot of rules around it, but the idea is that basically you have to get back before your drink goes cold. Otherwise, you're stuck there. Okay. So I just thought these like prerequisites for the time travel were really interesting because, I've read things with time travel before, but I find they follow quite a generic thing. Like once they make it back, they can still move around, do whatever they need to in the time. And, the main thing is they have to be careful not to give away they're there, or, it can change the future badly, and things like that, time travel. Or if they time travel to the future, they can't let people know they're there, those kind of stereotype type things. But this is different because you can't actually move from the chair when you travel. So I just thought this was great because it was really unique. So it is quite a short, easy read, but I just found it quite cute. It's almost like a collection of mini stories that link together because it's not really written in chapters. It's more like a collection of like I think it's 4 mini stories, and they do sort of intertwine because they're all set in the same cafe. And then it's about their experience like time traveling. And I just thought this was really unique and cool. So I gave it 4.25, which is the rating from my Fable, because I really like having the option to do 0.25, 0.5, and 0.75 because I feel like there's not enough distinction if you can only pick 1 star, 2 star, 3 star, 4 star, 5 star like you can on Goodreads. So I just sort of like round it on Goodreads. But yeah, please come and follow me on Fable if you want to know what I'm reading, or Goodreads if you have that, either or. I do put the reviews on both so you can see what I've been reading. So next up was my beginning to reread Fourth Wing. So this is a reread, but one of my favorite books from 2024 because I never got around to reading it until then. So I was up a little bit late onto the bandwagon of this, but I know there's still a lot of people joining because I have my friend Lauren has just picked up the set and I'm excited for her to read it. And I just have seen a lot of posts by people on Bookstagram and, even mentioning it on YouTube that they are giving it a go. I just love Fourth Wing. I think if, you haven't read much fantasy or not for a long time, I just think this is a really good introductory one back into it because the way Rebecca Yarros writes is so easy and accessible, but not like in a bad way. I mean, the actual complexity to the whole series and her writing and the, foreshadowing, etc., is so good, and so complex. But her writing is just really, really good and accessible to read. So I would definitely recommend it. But overall, basically, if you didn't see me put this in my 5-star reads of last year, just a quick summary is it's set around a war college where people go, they get split into different sections. I mean, they get to choose, but they can compete for the riders quadrant, which is they ride dragons. There's scribes, there's the infantry, like basically like the soldiers. So yeah, there's like different things, and we have a bit of a love story. There's a lot of drama and a lot of death, honestly. But yeah, that's a very, very brief summary. I did speak about it, I think, a little bit more in my 5-star reads of 2024 video, but I don't want to like go on about it too much. But yeah, reread, 5 stars. Then of course I reread Iron Flame. Yeah, obviously don't want to talk about the plot of like second and third books in case any of you haven't read the series and you do want to join into the beautiful world of Basgiath, and join us all for this crazy ride, because there are a lot of us on this crazy ride now. But yeah, so reread Iron Flame, 5 stars again. And of course, this was all in preparation for this book, Onyx Storm, which I'm sure you've seen everywhere. Those of you that aren't interested in this series are probably sick of hearing of it. I'm sorry. But there are a lot of fans, and it's always fine if you don't like the series. But yeah, of course, I had to reread the others for this. I also gave this one 5 stars. The humor in it is amazing compared to the rest of the series. I really appreciated the humor in this book. And yeah, obviously, I don't want to give anything away. And if you do want to know more, which I suggest you only do if you've read the series, you can go ahead and watch my Onyx Storm reading vlog if you haven't seen it, where you will get more of my opinions and details about this book. So after reading the whole Empyrean series trilogy, I was like, let's go back to a thriller. I am a bit of a seasonal reader. When it is those more dark, dank months, I am more likely to reach for a thriller than I am in the summer. I just feel like it's an atmospheric thing, I think, more than anything. Although I do always try and change up within a month what genres I'm reading a little bit, because I do just love so many, and therefore my TBR is always so full. So I did pick up The Housemaid by Frida McFadden next, because I know people have spoken about this for a long time. I did read The Teacher by Frida McFadden last year, but that's the only Frida McFadden book I've ever read. So I got this for Christmas, and I really, really enjoyed it. I know there are some criticisms of Frida McFadden, that her writing is a little bit too simple. And I will say, there was that line about I was holding a breath that I didn't realize I was holding. And I always see memes about this, and I've not really noticed it in books now, but now I think I'm like hyper aware. And it does contain that, I think, in this book. I'm pretty sure it did, because I remember laughing at it. Despite some people criticizing Frida's writing for being a little bit too simple, I have to say, I was addicted to this book. I wanted to know what was happening. And I think that is what, often makes a good book. If it holds your interest and you're really interested in what is going to happen, and you really want to know, you have that suspense built, then the writer has done what they need to do. And to me, simple writing just makes it more accessible for more people. So yeah, I thought this was really, really good. And I can't wait to read the rest of the trilogy. And I think there is like a little novella, but I must say I don't actually have that. But I got the trilogy for Christmas, and yeah. So I'm going to rate this 5 stars because I really didn't want to put it down. So as you can probably see, my January got off to such a strong start. Like, I think everything so far I rated 4 stars or above, right? I had a really, really good, strong start to January, and obviously we're right nearing the end now. And this is where I started to get a little bit like, oh, okay. So this book, Think Again by Jacqueline Wilson. This is one of the books I was most excited for to release last year. You might wonder why I've only just got around to reading it, but ultimately, if you don't know what this book is, it is an adult sequel to a series from when I was a child. So Jacqueline Wilson is a famous children's author in the United Kingdom. She is great. Like, my generation just completely grew up with her. Some of her books are a bit controversial these days, but you know what? I don't think it matters. The weird stuff she wrote about didn't mess me up, so whatever. At least I don't think so. But anyway, she wrote a series known as the Girls series, which was a set of 4 books that followed these teenage girls navigating their life through high school, relationships, etc. And weight issues, lots of stuff like that. And they're written from the perspective of a girl called Ellie. So I reread the 4 original books last year. Obviously, I'm not the intended audience for them anymore, but I still really enjoyed them and could appreciate them. Obviously, as I said, like I couldn't relate to them in the same way as I could when I was a teenager, but it was great nostalgia, and that was just to all prepare me for this adult sequel. So, needless to say, I was super excited for this. I was like, oh my God, we're going to get like an adult version. I thought that was a really clever idea. I don't know if any of the writers have done that, where they've done an adult sequel to books, that they wrote years ago for their like audience who would have loved them back then to now enjoy the sequel as like an adult. I thought this was an amazing idea and I was so excited. But sadly, it did fall a little flat for me. I'd kind of heard bad things before I read it, and I tried not to get any spoilers, so I didn't know why people were rating it lower. But as soon as I opened it, I knew why. The tone of the book is actually super similar to the old books. So even though this is an adult sequel, which is shown by the fact it has a little bit of spice in it, um, it just still sounded really like a teenager was writing the book, even though the character is now meant to be 40. Ellie is now meant to be 40. So basically, it just sounded really juvenile, and Ellie still made quite a few like very weird decisions. There's a character from the original series. I don't want to say too much to spoil it in case you were thinking of reading this and you were a fan of the original books. But there is a character brought back from the old series who I feel is kind of ruined. I don't feel we see enough of her friends that used to be in the old books. And ultimately, I just think there was a lot of like different bits of plotline in here that just didn't really go far enough. That it was just a little bit all over the place. And as I said, kind of felt like Ellie had not grown up at all, even though she's got a daughter in this book who is at university, so she is not young. Um, yeah, I that's what I really want to say. Like, I gave it a 2.5 because I did enjoy it. I wasn't bored, but I just felt like I was reading a book for me as a child again, but it had a bit of spice, which made it a bit weird. So, yeah, I gave it 2.5 because I'm glad I know what it's about now. Like, I wouldn't have, if I hadn't read it, I'd always wonder and I'd want to know why it was getting bad ratings because I was so excited for it. But I can see why it did, sadly. I think Jacqueline Wilson's great, but I think she needs to stick to the audience she is good at, you know? And then my final book for January was I Am Not Jessica Chen by Anne Liang. So A Song to Drown Rivers by Anne Liang was one of my favorite reads from last year. I love that book. I cannot recommend it enough. And I saw she was releasing a new book, and so I pre-ordered this one. I knew that this new book was for a young adult audience, whereas A Song to Drown Rivers is for adults. So I knew it was a bit, going to be a little bit different. But I do often enjoy young adult books. I do read quite a few of them. And I knew she'd release some others, which I haven't read as yet. But because I love The Song to Drown River so much, I just pre-ordered this and was super excited because also the plot just sounded like something that, I would love. So it's a little Freaky Friday-esque, the plot. It has a little romance in there too. But ultimately, there is a girl, Jenna Chen, who wishes to be her cousin, Jessica Chen, and this wish happens, and she gets stuck in the life of her cousin. I don't want to say too much about the plot, not to give it away, but ultimately she thinks her cousin's perfect and has the perfect life, and she's envious of her, and she ends up, living her life and then coming to an understanding that actually her own life isn't so bad, a little bit Freaky Friday-esque, but it's not two characters squabbling and having to learn to live together. It's about her accepting herself, which I do really like that aspect. However, I don't know if my expectations were just a little high after loving A Song to Drown Rivers so much, even though this book is ultimately very different and I knew it would be. But I didn't love this book. I liked it, but I didn't love it. I think ultimately for me, the concept, like for the plot, is amazing, but I definitely feel the romance element which is in there could have been explored a lot more deeply. I just kind of feel like a lot of the characters we sort of saw the surface of, but we never really got into the depths of the characters, and I would have liked to get to know them more. I would have liked to see her struggle with this new life of hers a little bit more. It all just seemed a little bit easy. Like no one seemed to really realize that Jenna Chen was in Jessica Chen's body. Like to me, it was a little bit unrealistic in that sense. Because I think, the difference is with something like Freaky Friday, there was a lot of weird moments where people were like questioned that they were acting a little strange and things. Whereas I don't really feel this came across in this book. And I just feel like a lot of the feelings and thoughts and plot lines in this book could have just been explored a lot more deeply. But I did still really enjoy it. I just feel like it has a long way to go. I feel like there is a lot more needed. There was a lot more plot depth and character depth needed for me to rate this book any higher. But I did give it a 3.5 because I enjoyed it. I wasn't bored reading it. I just feel like there was a lot more that should have happened in this book. So that is everything I read in January. I feel like I had a really good reading month. You know, it was quite a mix of genres, and I overall had some really high ratings in the books. I must say, I think I'm quite good at picking out what I think I'm going to like. So I do often end up rating books quite high. Am I a bit of an overgenerous rater sometimes? Maybe. I'm trying to be a little bit harsher this time, this year. So you probably will notice that in my ratings a little bit. But if I genuinely enjoy something and don't want to put it down, kind of enjoy it, I just feel like therefore it deserves a really high rating. So I kind of go with that. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed seeing what I read. Maybe you've seen something you'd like to read, or if you've read any of these books, please give me your opinions on them too, because I would love to hear. And if you have any book recommendations, I'm always willing to listen, even though my TBR is always overfull. And yeah, I will see you again real soon for another video. Bye!